She was loading a flat of tomatoes into the back of her truck at 4:30 in the morning when the first surveyor showed up. He parked his white pickup on the county road and walked the fence line with a flashlight, which she could see from the upper field. She watched for a moment, then went back to loading. The tomatoes were heirloom, badly shaped, and growing in rows she had laid out herself the spring before, on land that had been dismissed as too rocky for anything useful. There were 214 of them in the flat, which she had counted twice. They weighed 41 pounds total. She noted both numbers on the clipboard she kept on the passenger seat. The surveyor finished and left. She finished loading. She drove to Asheville before the sun was up. Her name was Emma Colvert. She was 37 years old. She had bought the 8 acres on Dunbar Ridge Road the previous spring for $19,000, which was less than a used car, which was the reason nobody else had wanted it. The parcel had been on the market for 11 months. The county assessor had it listed as marginal agricultural, rocky, unimproved. The previous owners, a family named Prester who had moved to Charlotte, had grown nothing on it for 6 years. Before that, according to the woman at the county records office, the Presters had tried sweet corn in the lower acre, a few rows of green beans, and 1 year of strawberries. None of it had done well. The county agent who had visited in 2017 had written in his report that the soil was shallow, high in base rock, limited water retention. He had recommended against further investment. Emma had driven the road 4 times before she made an offer. She had crumbled the soil in 3 places along the upper slope, each time working it between her fingers, the way her grandmother had taught her, feeling for what it would and would not do. The upper field had something in it that the assessor's description had not accounted for. It was thin, yes. It had rock, yes. But there was calcium in that rock, and the slope drained the way slopes are supposed to drain, which most farmland around there did not do. She wrote in her notebook, "Rocky, but honest, grows what it wants to grow, not what we want it to grow." She made the offer that afternoon. Emma Colvert had come back to Yancey County 2 years before from Raleigh, where she had lived for 9 years and where her marriage had ended in the ordinary way such things end, which is to say, slowly and then all at once. She had no children. She had a truck with 140,000 miles on it, a modest settlement from the divorce, and a set of skills she had acquired in a way she did not often explain to people. She had grown up on her grandmother's place 11 miles east of there. Her grandmother, Lottie Colvert, had farmed 22 acres by herself until she was 79. She had kept every receipt, every seed catalog, every note from the extension office, and 36 notebooks in her careful handwriting that tracked weather, soil condition, yield by row, and the price she got at market for everything she sold. When Lottie died, she left Emma the notebooks and a watch with a cracked face on the crystal. "It keeps time just fine," Lottie had written in the letter that came with it. "Don't let anybody talk you into throwing something out before you've seen what it can do." Emma wore the watch on her left wrist. The crystal had a crack running from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock. It had kept time for 3 years since Lottie died without stopping once. The property on Dunbar Ridge Road came with a barn that needed a new roof on one side, a hand pump that worked, and a well that the inspector said was clean. There was no house. Emma had bought a used 14 by 42 modular unit and had it set on a concrete pad on the eastern edge of the property. She had done the hookups herself with help from a man named Cortez Briggs, who did electrical work in the county and who did not ask unnecessary questions. The modular had cost her $12,000 used. She had insulated it herself in November, and by December it was warm enough. What Emma was farming was not what people expected when they drove Dunbar Ridge Road and saw the signs she had put up. The signs said Colvert Farm, which told them nothing. What she was growing was heirloom vegetables, which is to say the kinds of vegetables that plant breeders had been developing and preserving since before anyone had decided that vegetables needed to be uniform, shelf-stable, and able to withstand a 2,000-mile truck journey without bruising. Her tomatoes were crooked, some were ribbed, some were two colors at once, some weighed 2 pounds each, and some weighed 4 ounces. She grew 22 varieties. She kept their names and parentage in a notebook. She had sourced her seed stock from a network she had found through one of Lottie's old catalogs and had been expanding and cross-referencing for 2 years. The Mortgage Lifter, the Cherokee Purple, the Brandywine, both the red and the yellow, the German Johnson, which grew to a size that made people stop and stare, and then ask what was wrong with it. Nothing was wrong with it. It was doing what it had been bred to do for 140 years. She also grew 6 varieties of dry beans, 4 of winter squash, 2 of summer squash, and a rotating bed of greens she used to test soil amendments, and which she sold as a mixed green at the farmer's market in Burnsville every other Saturday, from May through October. She kept the market table simple, no signs beyond the names of the varieties, no photographs, no explanations. The produce spoke for itself, or it didn't. Mostly at first, it didn't. The Burnsville market ran on Saturdays, from 8 until noon. Emma arrived early and set up at the end of the row near the parking lot. In the first 3 Saturdays of her first season, she had sold 40% of what she brought. The rest came home with her and went into her own kitchen, or the compost. A woman named Patrice Dean, who ran a neighboring stand selling jams and pickled vegetables, had watched Emma's unsold tomatoes going back into boxes on a Saturday in June and had said gently, "You might try the red ones up front. People like to see red first." Emma had nodded. "Thank you," she said. She rearranged nothing. She drove home. She was not opposed to advice. She had simply concluded, after looking at her sales data from those first 3 Saturdays, that the problem was not the display arrangement. The problem was that people at the Burnsville market were not yet buying what she was selling, which meant she needed either a different customer or more time. She wrote this in her notebook. She drew a line under it. The surveyor came back the following Tuesday with 2 more surveyors and a crew that began clearing brush from the 50-acre parcel that abutted Emma's fence on the western side. The parcel had been owned by a timber company for 20 years and had been logged once and left to grow back in scrub pine and mountain laurel. The clearing crew worked for 3 days. Then a different crew came and began grading. Emma watched from the upper field while she was weeding. She did not stop weeding to watch. She noted in her notebook, "Construction west fence. Don't know what yet." She found out in July when a sign appeared on Dunbar Ridge Road at the entrance to the graded access road. Summit Ridge, Golf and Resort. Coming spring, 2024. Below that in smaller letters, 18-hole championship course, lodge and spa, farm-to-table dining. Below that, a rendering of what the lodge would look like, which was a structure made of stone and reclaimed wood and a great deal of glass, the kind of building that cost more per square foot than Emma's entire property had cost. She read the sign on a Wednesday morning in July. She stood in front of it for about 4 minutes. She was wearing her grandmother's watch and work boots that needed resoling and a flannel shirt with a frayed left cuff. A truck went by on the county road. She walked back to her fence and went through the gate and went back to work. The conversations in town began that week. She heard most of them through Roy Denton, who ran the feed store on Route 19W and who had an opinion about most things, and expressed it in a way that was more observation than hostility. Roy was 63 years old and had been running the feed store since his father retired in 1999. He sold feed, seed, basic tools and information, the last of which he provided for free to anyone who came in. "They're going to put a resort right up against your fence line," Roy said when she came in for lime in August. He said it the way a man states a fact he expects has implications. "I know," Emma said. "Course is going to run within 40 feet of your upper field, the way they've got it laid out." "I know." Roy put the bag of lime on the counter. He looked at her. "You talked to anybody about it? The county? A lawyer?" "No." He shook his head slowly, not in disapproval, in the way of a man watching something he cannot quite categorize. "They're going to build a parking lot for 500 cars about 200 yards from your south beds," he said. "I know." She paid for the lime and left. Roy watched her go and then turned back to his register. He mentioned it later that day to a man named Phil Autry, who came in for poultry feed, and who mentioned it at dinner to his wife Sandra, who told two people at church the following Sunday that the woman farming up on Dunbar Ridge was going to lose her land to the resort people one way or another, either from the noise and the traffic or from the offer they'd surely make once the course was built. Sandra had not heard this from anyone who had spoken directly to Emma. The story had gathered this detail somewhere between Roy's counter and Sunday morning, the way stories do when they travel through a small county. Emma had not lost her land. She had not received an offer. She had received a certified letter from the resort's development company, informing her that the planned course would be set back 6 feet from the shared fence line per county setback requirements, and that the resort's landscaping would be designed to minimize visual impact. The letter was 2 pages. It had the letterhead of a law firm in Charlotte. She read it twice, filed it in the metal box where she kept her property documents, and went back to her notebook. She wrote, "West fence, 40 FT from Upper Field. Resort kitchen. Need to find out who the chef is." She did not act on that note for 3 months. The summer and fall of her second season on Dunbar Ridge Road were when she understood what the rocky soil actually wanted to grow. It wanted to grow things slowly, things with concentrated flavor, things that did not know they were supposed to be uniform. Her Cherokee purples were coming in at 8 and 9 ounces with a flesh density she had not seen in the varieties she had tested on better soil. Her German Johnsons were cracking at the shoulders from their own weight. The mortgage lifters were setting up well despite the dry spell in August, which she attributed to the drainage and to the deep mulch she had been layering since April. She kept her field notes with the precision Lottie had taught her. Every row had a label and a number. Every plant in the notebook had a status notation: FS for full set, LS for light set, T for trouble. She walked every row every morning at 6 and wrote down what she saw. She adjusted irrigation based on what she wrote. She did not adjust it based on what she thought she remembered. By September, she had sold 60% of her weekly output at the market. The improvement had not come from rearranging the display. It had come from consistency, from being there every other Saturday with the same produce in roughly the same quantity, until the people who were going to buy her tomatoes had found her, and the people who were not had moved on. One of the people who had found her was a restaurant buyer from Asheville named Marcia Coles, who had stopped at the table in early August and picked up a Brandywine Yellow and held it to the light for a long time without saying anything. "What variety is this?" Marcia said. "Brandywine Yellow," Emma said. "Where are you growing it?" "Dunbar Ridge Road, Yancey County." Marcia had bought 4 pounds and asked if Emma had a card. Emma wrote her name and number on a piece of paper from the clipboard. Marcia called the following Tuesday and asked if Emma could supply 4 restaurants with mixed heirlooms through the end of the season. Emma said she would look at her numbers and call back by Thursday. She called back Thursday morning and said yes, she could supply 2 restaurants through the end of October, 4 restaurants the following year if the spring set was what she expected. Marcia said, "Huh?" Emma said, "I don't oversell what I have." Marcia said, "That's fine. 2 restaurants. Call me in March." This was the arrangement for the remainder of that season and through the winter. Emma spent November and December building 2 new cold frames for spring starts and expanding her seed catalog order and reading everything she could find about late-season storage for heirloom squash. She had a Hubbard squash variety that had kept well, and she wanted to know if she could extend that. She drove to the Yancey County Library on a Tuesday in January and found 2 books and a pamphlet from the Extension Service that she had not seen before. She took notes on her clipboard. The resort construction had been visible through the tree line all winter. They were moving fast. The lodge had walls by November and a roof by February. The fairways on the west side of the course were graded and seated. The equipment ran most days from 7 until 5. Emma had adapted to the noise after the first 2 weeks. She noted in her notebook that it did not seem to be affecting the root vegetables she had planted in the upper field, which was the field closest to the west fence. She thought again about the chef. In February, she drove to the Summit Ridge construction site and spoke to the project manager, a man named Gadsden Holt, who wore a fleece vest and carried a tablet and who looked at her fence line and then at her with an expression that suggested he was recalibrating something. "We're planting arborvitae along the fence," he told her. 10 feet on center, should block most of the visual. "That's fine," Emma said. "I wanted to ask who's going to be running the kitchen." Gadsden Holt looked at her. "Chef Martin Voss," he said. "He's coming from a place in Asheville." "Why?" "I'd like to talk to him before you open," Emma said. "I can pass along your information," Gadsden said. She wrote her name and number on a piece of paper and gave it to him. She drove home. She wrote in her notebook, "Voss, from Asheville. Call if he doesn't." Martin Voss called on a Tuesday in March. He had a direct way of speaking and got to the point quickly, which she appreciated. "Gadsden says you have a farm on the other side of the fence," Martin said. 8 acres, Emma said. "Heirloom vegetables." "Yes." A pause. "How long have you been doing this?" "This is my 3rd season," she said. Another pause. Shorter. "Can I come look?" He came the following Saturday. He arrived in a gray truck, got out and walked the fence line without saying anything for the first few minutes. Then he came through the gate she had left open and walked the rows. He was a compact man, around 50, with the kind of physical economy that Emma associated with people who worked in professional kitchens for 20 years. He stopped at the Brandywine Yellow Row. He crouched and looked at a fruit that was just beginning to set. He did not touch it. "These are early," he said. 4 weeks ahead of last year," she said. "I changed the mulch depth." He stood up and looked at her. "The resort's landscape design doesn't exactly feature a farm," he said. He said it neutrally. "The marketing materials have the arborvitae hedge on the west side. The view from the 18th green is going to be the ridge." "I know," Emma said. "What they're selling is pristine," he said. He was not being cruel. He was describing a problem. "A working vegetable farm with a modular unit on it is not pristine." "I know that too," Emma said. He walked to the end of the row and turned back. "I'm building a menu around regional provenance," he said. 40% of what I buy, I want to be able to say county of origin. Ideally, field of origin. The sourcing story is part of what we're selling." He looked at her fence. "I have a problem. The sourcing story I'd like to tell is the farm adjacent to the property. That farm is the farm the resort's ownership would prefer wasn't visible from the 14th fairway." Emma looked at him. What are you asking me?" Martin Voss put his hands in his pockets. "I'm asking if you want to sell to the kitchen, quietly, which means I don't feature you in the menu copy. I don't put you on the sourcing board. I buy from you, I pay you what the product is worth, and nobody makes a point of it one way or the other." Emma looked at her rows. She looked at the fence. Beyond the fence, Through the scrub pine that was still partly standing, she could see the roof of the lodge taking shape. "What do you pay for heirloom tomatoes?" she said. He told her. The number was $3 a pound above what Marcia Coles was paying. He told her what he needed in volume, which was more than she was currently producing. He told her what he needed in consistency, which was significant. He told her he would want to see her records before committing. "I have records," she said. She went inside and got the last 2 notebooks. He sat at her kitchen table and read through them. He turned pages without speaking. He read the way a person reads when they are looking for specific things and finding them. After 20 minutes, he closed the second notebook and set it on the table. "You track humidity in the cold frames," he said. "Yes. Most people don't. My grandmother did," Emma said. He nodded. "I want to start in June," he said. "I'll need to see what you can produce at scale through the end of October. If the quality holds, I'll talk to you about a year-round arrangement with the root vegetables and the squash." She agreed to the terms. They shook hands. He left through the gate, and she watched him drive down Dunbar Ridge Road. She went inside and wrote in her notebook, "Voss, June start. $3 above Marcia. Scale question. Check seed order." She called her seed supplier that afternoon and adjusted the order. She called Cortez Briggs about expanding the cold frame capacity by 30%. She did not tell anyone in Burnsville about the arrangement, and neither did Martin Voss. The arborvitae hedge went in along the west fence in April, 10 feet on center, exactly as Gadsden Holt had said. By the time the resort opened in May, a person standing on the 14th fairway could not see Emma's modular unit, and they could not see her rows, and they could not see her barn roof, and the landscape the resort had created was in every visible way exactly what the marketing materials had described. Roy Denton heard about it anyway. He heard it through his own channel, which was not gossip exactly, but was the same information moving through different people in a different order. One of his regulars, a cattle farmer named Leon Tate, who had land that bordered the resort on the north side, had driven past Emma's gate in May and seen Martin Voss's gray truck parked there. Leon mentioned it to Roy in June when he came in for mineral blocks. "She's selling to the resort kitchen," Leon said. "Chef's truck was at her place twice last month." Roy was quiet for a moment. He put the mineral blocks on the counter. "That right," he said. "That's what it looks like," Leon said. Roy thought about this. He thought about the certified letter from the Charlotte law firm. He thought about Emma saying "I know" 3 times in a row without elaborating. He said, "Huh?" which was the same word Phil Autry had used in March when he heard the resort was buying local and paying above market. In June, Emma delivered her first order to the resort kitchen, 62 pounds of mixed heirlooms and 4 pounds of dry beans. She pulled around to the service entrance, which was on the east side of the building and not visible from the lodge's main entrance or the golf course. She loaded the produce onto a dolly and brought it inside. Martin Voss's sous chef, a young woman named Dara, checked the invoice and signed it and asked about the Brandywine yellows specifically. "Do you have more of these?" Dara said. 14 pounds a week through August, Emma said. "After that, it depends on the set." "He's going to want all of them," Dara said. Emma wrote this in her notebook that evening. She made a note about the Brandywine yellow allocation. She adjusted the harvest schedule. She delivered every Tuesday morning for the next 18 weeks. The orders expanded steadily. By August, she was delivering 108 pounds a week, which was more than she had produced in her entire first season. Martin Voss had expanded the scope of what he was buying to include 4 varieties of squash and a dry bean mix that Dara had called, plainly, "the best one we've found." He had also asked about the mixed greens, which she had started supplying in September. He paid her promptly, every 2 weeks, by check. The amount on the fourth check was more than Emma had made in the first 6 months of her second season combined. She did not tell anyone in Burnsville this. She kept selling at the market on alternate Saturdays because the market was part of how she understood what people were responding to, and because Patrice Dean, who sold jams at the adjacent table, was a person she liked talking to in the early morning before the market opened. Patrice had asked once where the bulk of her volume was going, and Emma had said, "I found a kitchen buyer," and Patrice had nodded, and that was the end of it. The information traveled anyway. It always does. Leon Tate mentioned it to Phil Autry, who mentioned it to his wife Sandra, who mentioned it at a church potluck in August, by which point the story had acquired the detail that the resort chef had come to her, and that the price he was paying was something. Sandra did not know the actual price. She knew it was higher than market, which was accurate. She told 2 people this, and they told others, and the version that reached Roy Denton's counter in September was that Emma Colvert was supplying the resort kitchen exclusively and had signed some kind of formal contract and was making enough to expand the operation. The contract part was not accurate. The exclusively part was not accurate. The making enough to expand part was accurate, which Roy decided was the relevant piece. In September, he called Martin Voss directly. Roy was not a man who went around things when he could go through them. He had a standing order for game feed that the resort kitchen used, and he had Martin Voss's number from that relationship. He asked about the sourcing arrangement with Emma Colvert. Martin Voss said, "She grows what I need. The quality is consistent and the records are precise. I can tell you which row a tomato came from." A pause. "Why are you asking?" Roy said, "I've known that family since her grandmother was farming that ridge." Martin Voss said, "The Brandywine Yellows are the best tomato on my menu right now." He said it the way people say something that is not an argument because it does not need to be one. Roy hung up and sat behind his counter for a minute. Then he said to the empty store, "Huh." By October, Emma had done the arithmetic on what the third season had produced and what it had returned. She had sold to Martin Voss 1,146 pounds of tomatoes, 240 pounds of squash, 88 pounds of dry beans, and 63 pounds of mixed greens. She had sold to Marcia Coles's restaurant accounts 412 pounds of tomatoes. She had sold at the Burnsville market 237 pounds of produce across all varieties. The total return was more than double her second season. She wrote the total in her notebook and drew a box around it. She did not write anything else in the box. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at the notebooks stacked on the shelf. Lottie's handwriting on the spines. The current season's 3 notebooks next to them. Her own handwriting. Outside, the arborvitae hedge along the west fence was growing in fast, the way arborvitae does in good mountain soil. She could not see the golf course through it. She did not know if they could see her. She touched the watch on her left wrist. The crack in the crystal ran from 10 to 4, and the second hand moved steadily around the dial without stopping. In November, Martin Voss came to the farm. He came in the gray truck and parked inside the gate and sat at her kitchen table with a coffee she had made and said he wanted to talk about the following year. "I want to feature the sourcing on the menu," he said. Emma looked at him. "I thought you couldn't do that." "There was a meeting," Martin said. He said it plainly with the tone of a man who has had the meeting and is now past it. The resort's marketing position shifted. They're now saying the adjacent farm is part of the regional character, that the hedge is intentional to give the operation privacy, that it's a working farm, not a backdrop. He held his coffee cup in both hands. "It's still the same farm. The produce is the same. Nothing about what you're doing changed. What changed is what they decided they needed." Emma thought about this. She said, "What does featuring mean?" table cards, sourcing board in the dining room, possible farm visit component for the lodge guests in the summer. He paused. No photographs of you if you don't want them. Just the name and the road, and the fact that it's the field on the other side of the hedge. She said, "What does the price do?" "It goes up," Martin said. He told her the number. It was the kind of number that changes the arithmetic on whether you expand by half or by double. She looked at her notebook on the table. She looked at the numbers in it. She checked because she always checked before she concluded. She said, "Give me until Thursday." She called him Thursday morning. "Yes," she said. The sourcing board went up in the Summit Ridge dining room in April of the following year. It was a piece of reclaimed wood mounted near the entrance to the dining room. In the center of the board, in small clean letters, Culvert Farm, Dunbar Ridge Road, Yancey County. Below that, in smaller letters, Heirloom Vegetables, Traditional Seed Stock, 3rd year of operation. The 14th fairway ran 40 feet from Emma's upper field. She could hear the golfers sometimes in the early morning, the distant sound of voices and the occasional metal contact of a club. She worked in the upper field most mornings and paid it no attention. The arbor-vitae hedge was 4 feet taller than it had been when it was planted. In 2 more years, it would be a wall. Roy Denton heard about the sourcing board from Leon Tate, who heard about it from a guest at the resort who had photographed it and posted it to a regional food account on Instagram. The photograph had reached 3,000 shares by the time it got back to Yancey County, which was more shares than the county had people. Roy mentioned it to Phil Autry, who mentioned it to his wife Sandra, who said, "I always thought those tomatoes looked unusual." She had never bought one. Emma was at the Burnsville market on a Saturday in May when Patrice Dean showed her the Instagram photograph on her phone. In the photograph you could see the sourcing board and behind it the dining room, which was full. Emma looked at the photograph for a moment. She handed the phone back to Patrice. "You want more coffee," she said. "I would," Patrice said. Emma poured from the thermos she always brought, and they stood at the edge of the table in the early morning before the market opened, drinking coffee in the quiet that comes before people arrive. A truck went past on the road. The light was low and orange. Emma's tomatoes were on the table behind her, and they were crooked, and some were 2 colors at once, and some weighed a pound, and some weighed 4 ounces, and none of them were what a tomato was supposed to look like if you were going by what trucks carried for 2,000 miles. They were what they had always been. What had changed was who was looking. She thought about Lottie's notebooks on the shelf. She thought about the sentence she had written in her first spring on Dunbar Ridge Road. "Rocky but honest, grows what it wants to grow." That was still the truest thing she had written. Everything since had been an extension of it. Patrice handed back the coffee cup. She looked at Emma's table. "You know," she said, "my grandmother always said the ones that don't look right are the ones that taste like something." She said it plainly in passing, the way important things are usually said. Emma said, "Your grandmother was right." She turned back to the table and began setting out the last of the day's squash. The market was opening in 12 minutes. The truck on the road was gone. The light was getting better,